afternoon. I'm Lee Moldaver, the chair of the City Creeks and Watershed Advisory Committee, and this is our Wednesday, July 15th, 2009 monthly meeting. And item number one on the posted agenda is the call to order, and item number two would be the call of the roll to make sure we have a working quorum present. Liz?
Chair Moldaver.
Here.
Mr. Bullock? Here. Mr. Jordan is not here yet. Ms. Lomas is not here yet. Mr. Schluter?
Here.
Mr. Weber?
Here.
Mr. Wilson?
Here.
And Ms. Falcone, Mr. Hockman, and Mr. Jostes are not here.
Thank you. A quorum is present, which allows us to move to item number 3, approval of the minutes of the June 17th, 2009 meeting, a memorable meeting for those of us who were lucky enough to be there. Is there a motion to... right, is there a second? It's been moved and seconded to accept the draft minutes as submitted. If there are no questions, corrections, or amendments, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? Right, the minutes are unanimously adopted. That brings us to item number 4, agenda adjustments. Mr. Benson, have any members of the committee or the council or the staff recommended any changes in the posted agenda?
No, no adjustments.
Thank you very much. That brings us to item number 5, public comment, where any of the several people in the audience who wish to bring business before the committee that is not on tonight's agenda are, under the Ralph M. Brown Act, invited to come forward and speak for up to 2 minutes. Are there any people who would like to share any creek-related information tonight that's not on the agenda? Well, I guess not yet. So that brings us to item number 6, committee member and staff communications. Mr. Benson, have we had any communications?
I have had an opportunity to meet with our 2 new committee members, and I'd like to welcome Paul Bullock to the committee tonight. And Paul is the general manager at the Eagle Inn, which is a family-owned and operated hotel, a nice hotel over on Natoma and Castillo Streets in downtown Santa Barbara. And Paul was appointed to the committee by City Council on June 30th, and he is going to be representing the hotel and lodging industry on the committee. And he's a surfer, a diver, ocean user. He's very knowledgeable about the issues the committee's worked on. I really enjoyed having a chance to meet with him and talk with him this week, and glad to have him on board.
Yeah, welcome, Paul. I was going to ask either Mr. Bullock or Mr. Benson, is that Eagle Inn the one that's within walking distance of the harbor and the wharf and Emilio's restaurant down on Cabrillo Boulevard, like 1 or 2 blocks from the freeway and 1 or 2 blocks from the ocean?
Yeah, it's actually on Bath Street and Natoma. Yeah, we're right there.
Well, welcome aboard, and we're lucky to have you. And for those of us listening at home or in the audience, it's important to remember that all of the revenue that support all of the creek and water quality improvement programs through this committee and the staff are all funded by transit occupancy tax that's administered and shared with the city by the lodging and visitor industry in Santa Barbara. And so we're always very grateful that representatives of the industry can participate and make our work better. Were there any other communications? Well, let me do Cameron first.
Well, Mr. Chair, I also met with Natasha Lomas, who is the other new member of the committee. I know she's planning to be here tonight, so she must be running a little bit late. And Ms. Lomas has a long history, and she's walking in the door right now. A long history and a great deal of experience with creeks all along the Central Coast, in particular in the city of Santa Barbara. And so it was great to have an opportunity to sit down this week and have a chance to meet with Natasha. And Welcome. Thank you. Glad to have you.
Welcome aboard. Are you any relation to the famous artist whose work is revered throughout Southern California?
I don't know about revealed that far, but I think we've run into art at art receptions a few times.
Yeah. So anyway, it's terrific to have you, and also terrific to have the committee up to full strength again. I believe that Roger had a communication to share.
Yes, Cameron, we were scheduled to start the Upper Las Positas project in June. Did we get going?
Yes, that's the Upper Las Positas Creek Restoration and Stormwater Management Project, and yes, it started at the end of June. It's under construction. They're plowing ahead with lots of excavation. They've actually built one of the basins already. It's almost complete. By the end of this week, the firm that's doing the boring to drain stormwater from the San Jose Lane neighborhood up on the north side of the project is going to be mobilizing on Friday, so they'll be doing their boring and creating that new drain next week, and project's moving forward on schedule, and it's pretty amazing. Next month we will be going out to the project site for a site visit with the committee, and we're going to move our meeting out there so you all have a chance to see the project about 40% of the way through.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. And for the benefit of the audience, let me ask Mr. Benson if there are members of the public who are really interested in observing the project firsthand. Is there a mechanism by which they can call up and accompany us on the visit? And if so, what is it?
Sure. Anyone interested in participating in that meeting, it's a publicly noticed meeting. We'll be sending out notice with the time and location of the meeting approximately a week before the meeting. Anyone that's interested could call 897-2658 and request to have an email sent to them or a letter sent to them, and we'll keep them notified not only about that meeting but all of the work we're doing.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for raising that, Roger. That brings us to, Daniel?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to briefly mention that just this afternoon I was at a site visit at a property in Sycamore Canyon that 3 sides of it burned, and just rather timely considering our agenda item this evening, but I just wanted to, granted this is 1 5-acre area, steep hillside that completely 100% burned in the tea fire. I just wanted to mention that there was probably about 60% ground cover already from regeneration and native vegetation. I was incredibly surprised by how robust the cover was. So that's really encouraging. Plants still growing, obviously giving time towards this winter. One incremental step. Just want a little dose of positivity there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Are there any other bits of communication under item 6 to share before we go to item number 7, subcommittee reports? Okay. Mr. Benson, were there any subcommittee meetings since last month's regular meeting?
No subcommittees met. We may want to continue this item, Mr. Chair, to see if Mr. Jordan, he had called and said he was going to be a little late tonight. He did attend as the committee's liaison to the stakeholder group that is meeting about the Upper Las Positas Creek project, and we had a meeting out at the project site last Thursday, and if he may have something that he'd like to report out from that meeting. So if we can continue that item to later and check in with him, that might be a good idea.
Sure.
Thanks.
Good idea. That brings us to item number 8, business item A, Stormwater Management Program Status Report. And that will be our respected longtime staff, Autumn Malanka. Autumn?
Okay. Good evening, committee members. Thanks for having me. It's been a while since I've been up here, so it's good to see you all. And it's nice to meet the new committee members. As Chair Moldaver mentioned, my name's Autumn Malanka, and I've been with the City Creeks Division for a little over 3 years now. I was actually hired on to manage and administer the city's stormwater management program, and that's what I'm here this evening to do, is to give you a little update, status update and report on where we're at with that program. It's been in sort of a trial test run for the past 5 or 6 years. It's something that the city's been working on since the laws required us to do it way back in the early 90s. And so I kind of wanted to start with a little introduction, because we do have a couple of new members here this evening to talk about where this comes from and why the city has to implement it. So it all really stems from, this is really basically speaking, it stems from the Clean Water Act, something that the federal government put into effect way back in the 60s and 70s to address the fact that we are building out our cities. We're becoming a really urbanized area. Before, when it used to rain, it used to be a natural event, and now when it rains, it's an unnatural event. It hits all of our streets and sidewalks and buildings, and the rainwater now flows very quickly, carrying a multitude of pollutants into our storm drain system. And the storm drain system takes all of that polluted water directly into our creeks and ocean. So the Clean Water Act has sort of evolved and morphed over the past couple of decades into what we now call the NPDES regulations, which are the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System regulations. It's a mouthful. But if you hear that term flying around, that's what that is. And it's those regulations that have now come to say every municipality that has a certain amount of population has to implement one of these stormwater management programs. And so now the state water board has told the regional water boards that they have to manage all these municipalities and tell us, all right, you've got to have these programs and we have to approve them, and then they need to be reviewed on an annual basis. So this program is really meant to address the non-point source pollution that comes from stormwater runoff. So it's anything that comes off of our buildings and sidewalks and streets, any contaminated substance that ends up in clean rainwater is addressed by this stormwater management program, and we refer to that as the SWIMP. That's the acronym. So like I said, it's been many years in the process of evolving. We started producing the SWIMP back in 2003, and we've kind of been on a test drive with it since then. What's special about this year is it was just recently approved by the State Water Board back in the beginning of this year. So we're in January 2009, we formally began year one. And what that means is now we have to formally submit annual reports to our regional water board and ultimately the state water board. So the administration of this program has become more formalized and specific. So that's why I wanted to give everyone an update today. Shall we? Other way. Don't do anything. It's waiting for you to do it for me, Liz. There it is. Thanks. So to go for, okay. Okay. So the city's stormwater management program, and I'll refer to it as the SWIMP, is a coordinated effort. It's a city-wide requirement, though. That's the important thing to note from this update. It's produced and implemented by city staff. So compliance and implementation of the programs listed in the SWIMP is a city requirement. Creeks Division simply provides overall administration, and there are best management practices in the SWIMP that the Creeks Division is responsible for, which I'll get into. It's evolved over the past 5 or 6 years, as I mentioned, and it was approved by the Water Board just this January 2009. The intent, as I mentioned, is to reduce and eliminate discharge of pollutants to protect water quality. The framework and methods that are laid out in the Stormwater Management Program start with 6 minimum control measures. So the document is divided into 6 measures, which I'll get into what those are, that are meant to control pollutants at a minimum. Under each of those 6 sections are best management practices at the end. We refer to those as BMPs, and tied to those BMPs are actual measurable goals. So it's that third little key thing there that we actually have to report on. We have to report on the measurable goals to the Water Board annually. I don't know if any of you guys have seen this since it's been approved, but it's a big document. This is the SWIMP, and you can see that it's quite thick. So there's a lot of best management practices and measurable goals in there. The program is a 5-year program. So the timeline is 5 years, starting from this January 2009. We report annually, and then after those 5 years, it'll be updated and revised as appropriate. The minimum control measures, I'll just go through them quickly, are public education and outreach, public involvement and participation, illicit discharge detection and elimination. Illicit discharge is just a fancy way of saying prohibited or illegal polluted discharge. Construction site stormwater runoff control, post-construction stormwater management. That's kind of another strange term. Post-construction means anything that is designed into a construction or development project that is going to stay there, that is the ultimate end result. So post-construction stormwater management. And pollution prevention, which is a nice way of saying good housekeeping for municipal operations. Best management practices, as I mentioned, are listed at the end of each of these minimum control measures. And there is 167 total in the city's SWIMP. And that includes a few from the water department and the airport department, which are actually managed a little bit separately than the city as a whole. 41 of those best management practices are specifically requirements for the Creeks Division. And as I mentioned, most of those are up front in the first 2 sections. That's public outreach and public involvement and education. 15 more BMPs are Creeks Division coordinating with other departments, so it's a coordinated effort on some of them. And then about 111 BMPs are all the other city divisions that have to implement this program. And that's, I don't have them all listed here, but it's 13 separate divisions and departments, so it's quite a coordinated effort. Starting with the first one up front, public education and outreach is meant to educate the public about runoff impacts and methods to reduce stormwater pollution. And programs that are listed in that first section include youth education, informational materials, and managing our website. The city's website has quite a bit of information about the SWIMP on it. Community events, neighborhood outreach, as well as business outreach and media campaigns. I wanted to give an example of one of these public education BMPs that the Creeks Division is currently working on. And right now that's we're conducting a stormwater BMP guidance manual training. It's a workshop training, rather, that we've coordinated with Geosyntech consultants. They're actually the consultants that helped us produce the guidance manual. We've so far conducted 2 trainings for city staff. Those were conducted in June, and we did them in here, and they were a success. A big turnout. We had close to about 100 staff show up total, and the trainings went really well. Spurred a lot of questions. I'm still working on emails and phone calls. And then we have these first and final training scheduled for July 28th with design professionals and contractors. Daniel, in fact, you should have an email in your inbox this evening. It's going to focus on contractors, architects, engineers, anybody local who would potentially design stormwater management designs into development or new and or redevelopment. Moving on to the third control measure that's in the Stormwater Management Program, illicit discharge detection and elimination. That's designed to detect and eliminate polluted stormwater and non-stormwater discharges. Non-stormwater discharges is a fancy way of saying water that's running down your street during dry weather. Those programs include producing a stormwater ordinance, which the city does not technically have at this point, but that's something that we're required to produce over the next couple of years. Enforcing our municipal code, the water quality codes. Creek illicit discharge enforcement program, that's another thing that the Creeks Division does. Methods to address contaminated non-stormwater discharges are identified as BMPs in this section. and training and public information on hazards, why it's important to stop these illicit discharges. An example of this control measure is that we're working on a stormwater ordinance audit. It's really the first step in producing a stormwater ordinance, identifying conflicts and potential conflicts that are existing in city documents such as guidelines, policies, even the municipal code that have a way of conflicting with what the stormwater management program is trying to achieve or the guidance manual is trying to achieve. This audit, it will be completed in August 2009, so we're about halfway through. And as I mentioned, it's really the first initial step to producing our stormwater ordinance is identifying, all right, what are the potential hang-ups and problems that we might come up against into implementing a stormwater ordinance, and then we'll start dealing with those identified conflicts later. The Creeks Division, as I mentioned, also manages a water quality enforcement program. That's something that we've reported on to this committee quite a few times. The new news is that we have a new staff person who's taken on the enforcement program full time, although the other two staff, myself and Tim Burgess, are still assisting. But we have somebody on a dedicated basis to that. So it's been beefed up. There's more of us now, which is a good thing. Approximately 50 calls were called in last quarter. That just kind of gives you an idea of the amount that we get in a quarter. The norm is to receive maybe 2 or 3 calls in a day and then nothing for a day or two. It just sort of comes in waves. But it's something that does keep us busy because there's quite a bit of follow-up work to any enforcement call, whether it's finding where the actual discharge was coming from or tracking down who did it, educating them afterward, issuing notices of violation, citations. It equates to lots of staff time. The fourth control measure in the SWIMP is construction site stormwater runoff control. And that is meant to reduce stormwater pollutants specifically from active construction sites. This is where the building division comes in from the city. This is specifically their section, and most of the BMPs are apply to them. Their programs that they're required to implement are regulatory mechanisms for implementing the erosion and sediment policy. They have a pre-construction site plan review process, and then inspection of the construction sites and BMPs. I'll be reporting now, or receiving reports from the building department on how many inspections they do throughout the year, which ones actually required stop work orders, how they were resolved, that kind of information. So we're working with them on that. I kind of already got into the slide. The construction site runoff control examples, again, is building department implements the BMPs. They track their stop work orders and fines, and they do ensure compliance. To give you a number, about 325 projects were inspected just during the first quarter. We've been asking for quarterly reports from all the different city departments and divisions so we can kind of keep up with this annual reporting requirement. And just that's January, February, and March. They do that many inspections. Post-construction stormwater management. This is meant to implement design requirements to address stormwater runoff from new and/or redevelopment. Excuse me. And the major elements of that program are we have a design review and discretionary approval process. So that's something that the Creeks Division participates in to an extent, but it is a big requirement for community development and planning to review designs that applicants bring in wanting to develop parcels, and there's a discretionary approval process that they go through in order to implement these post-construction stormwater designs. So they implement BMP design standards for any new and redevelopment. Post-construction stormwater management, another goal in that minimum control measure is to incorporate those things into the municipal code. So as I mentioned, that would be part of the stormwater ordinance that we need to produce. And there's a BMP maintenance verification requirement in the SWIMP for this as well. I wanted to give you a few examples of what we're doing to address this control measure to date. community development and public work departments are implementing these infiltration and water capture BMPs into development projects. So I mentioned, or I actually gave a presentation almost a year ago now, I think at this point, on the guidance manual. It's called the City's Stormwater BMP Guidance Manual, something that we produced last year. It was a big endeavor, a big coordinated effort with a lot of input from different stakeholders, contractors, engineers, design professionals, on helping us produce the guidance manual. And that's something that is helping us satisfy this requirement under post-construction stormwater management. We're tracking implementation. Community development is required to track how many applicants and development projects are actually implementing these stormwater management designs that are in the guidance manual. Another thing that we recently produced is the city's homeowners brochure. And it has examples of basic stormwater management designs. I actually brought some examples. I'm kicking myself because I only brought 5, but we can kind of pass them around. And it's just a neat, handy tool for local residents to be able to see, all right, what are we talking about when we say you have to implement stormwater management designs? So it's good stuff. You want to pass them down? And one other good example of what we're doing to comply with post-construction stormwater management is the general plan update. You've all heard that that's going on. The update is considering expansion and revision of watershed planning and water quality improvement programs. So that's another thing that's in our SWIMP. It says that we have to, in our general plan update, we have to make sure that we consider that we're capturing all of the water quality goals and intentions of the city. So the last and final control measure is pollution prevention and good housekeeping. And that just has to do with the operation and maintenance programs that prevent polluted runoff specifically from our city jobs, from the municipal operations. And those programs include pollution prevention plans. It says that every operational city division, and operational means any division that does field work or hands-on work out in the field, has to have a pollution prevention plan. So that's something we have to show in the annual report. Staff training has to occur. I've been working with all the other operational division managers and supervisors to get their staff trained on stormwater BMPs. The BMPs are really specific to the operational division, so it has to do with what they do on a day-to-day basis. And then there's other BMPs under this control measure that have to do with capital projects, street sweeping, filters, creek cleanups. Those are all pollution prevention and good housekeeping BMPs. A couple examples. Containing maintenance wastes on site. That's something that we get calls a lot about through our enforcement program, is that, oh, you know, we see somebody doing a project over here and their construction waste or maintenance waste are just, you know, flowing off the curb, and that's a really important BMP. Containing wash water is another one. We get calls on that a lot. Inspecting facilities and vehicles. There's BMPs that require different city departments and divisions to actually make sure their vehicles aren't leaking on a day-to-day basis, that they're stocked with spill kits, that facilities are being washed the right way, water containment's being implemented. And lastly, maintaining spill kits and absorbents on hand. So those things are actually available and that staff know where they are if and when they need them. I mentioned Creeks Division trains city staff annually on these BMPs. So that's something I've been working on since May or June, and I think I've got 2 more to do. So I'm almost finished. So what are the next steps? It kind of gave you a general summary of, you know, what we're working on currently. So that's where we're at. What's to come? I think it's important to sort of remember that we're only 6 months or half a year into the first year of formal SWIMP implementation and reporting. So there is a little learning curve going on, but it's something that is definitely being addressed. The annual report will actually be due in April 2010 because the lovely Water Board gives us 3 months to produce it. So we have January, February, March to pull together the annual report, and then it's due in April. Like I mentioned, the coordination effort is quite large. There's 13 city departments and divisions. We're all learning about how to track these 111 BMPs, figuring that out. But overall, we're feeling like we're on track to meet the SWIMP requirements. Luckily, as I mentioned in the beginning, we've had some trial runs and a couple of years under our belt to figure things out. So that's where we're at. And now I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you, Autumn. Great report. Before committee members ask questions, I was wondering, for the benefit of the people watching at home, the name of the new enforcement officer and what number people can dial or email if they have something they want to report that they'd like to bring to that person's attention.
Yes, this is a good opportunity. So the name of the new enforcement officer for the Creeks Division is Jim Rumbley. Very nice gentleman. And the number is 897-2688. We call it our 2688 enforcement line. So there you have it.
Thank you. Let me start on my right and see if there are any specific questions on the report. So let me start with Committeewoman Lomas to see if you had any questions.
The only question I have is, how specific is the plan? I know that the city of Lompoc has been told that they have to cut off all rain runoff from properties. That's going to be really difficult. So I'm wondering if this plan's going to be under the same requirement.
The plan is actually, this is something that just addresses the NPDES regulations, which say that we have to implement certain requirements. I don't want to get too into them because they are fairly technical. But we have to limit the amount of volume and rate of stormwater that's running off of parcels, and we have to treat the 85th percentile storm from each parcel, which happens to be about a 1-inch storm for Santa Barbara. So the requirements are a little different for every municipality depending on what their rainfall is and all that. But those are really the specific requirements that the Stormwater Management Program address. As far as getting more specific than that and saying all rainwater, that's something that the regional board is working on. They're calling them hydromodification requirements. And it's still a very gray area. It's something that's really being worked out, and no clear measures have been established at this point.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Wilson?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Malanka.
You're welcome.
Just wondering if you could briefly clarify, you made a statement that many calls have been coming in regarding city maintenance yard wash water. Just wondering what you meant by that.
I may have misspoken. Not city maintenance yard wash water. We get calls a lot in general on wash water coming from commercial businesses, residential areas, wash water from all over the city. I meant wash water within the city.
Great,
I think
thanks.
is what I
I can only imagine that's a rather difficult concept for people to understand how to actually wash things down properly. So I'm sure you guys are available with information and guidance and assistance on how people can do that, right?
Absolutely. I want to touch on that committee member. I want to call you Daniel, but Wilson. One of the hardest parts of the enforcement program is to getting people to understand that wash water is actually a pollutant, even if they're just using water, because it's whatever they're washing off has got to be dirty, right? So it is a challenge on getting people to understand that there may be one or two more steps to a way of doing something that they would have normally done with simply hosing off and not even thinking about where it goes. So it's something that is an education and outreach challenge, but I think that it's important to note that the way the Creeks Division approaches it and the way the administrative code, citation code, allows us to approach it is that we always start with an education approach first. The administrative code says that we give a notice of violation first, which is simply a warning letter. And then we talk to them and explain why this is wrong, how they can do it otherwise. And then if it happens again is when the city actually incurs citations.
And to what extent is the Creeks Division's Business Assistance Program actually working in this subject?
I think it's great. The Business Assistance Program has been, we call it the Clean Water Certification Program. And that's something where we go to local businesses. We're focusing now on restaurants, automotive businesses, and now more recently power washers, which include mobile car washers and power washers. We sit down with them and talk to them about how they can do their day-to-day jobs in ways that capture and contain wash water and other contaminants that their jobs may produce. And in addition to that, we now have the Business Assistance Program, which is something that says if you do, it's a small grant program that says if you do implement these proper best management practices at your job site or at your facility, the city is able to actually purchase items that help contain or capture wash water, like dikes, berms, vacuum, dry wet backs, that kind of thing, and it's been very successful.
And
Good.
have these have businesses been applying for and receiving these grants through this program?
Yes, I don't have numbers on me this evening, but a couple of staff members with the Creeks Division has been working on that now for a little over a year, I'd say, and we've gotten many calls and then fewer actual follow-ups where people want to follow through with it and do it. But I'd like to say I've probably purchased products for probably 3 or 4 different businesses and certified many more than that.
Thank you for your great information. Note to people out there with businesses, excellent opportunity and resource for you. Contacts Creeks Division, grant opportunities, education assistance. Thank you very much.
Good.
Mr. Bullock, do you have any questions or comments on the report?
Thank you for your report. I may just be stating the obvious, but it seems like this is not just stormwater, and it's not just wintertime, it's year-round, any kind of discharge water.
That's right. Good clarification to make. It's called the Stormwater Management Program, but as I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, it addresses all non-point source pollution. So that includes dry weather flows. So any kind of water that's coming off of any hard surface is something that this program and these requirements address. So it's not just stormwater, it's wash water, it's irrigation overflow, it's any kind of pollutant, even construction materials. It doesn't have to be water-based. It's, construction materials, sediment, all that.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot.
Thank you.
I had 2 quick questions before we went to Mr. Weber. Number one, this brochure you referenced, A Homeowner's Guide to Managing Stormwater, is that a free city brochure? And if homeowners within the city would like to get a free copy, where could they secure one?
Good question. Yes, it is a free brochure, and it is up at the Community Development Planning desk at 630 Garden right here. I just checked today, actually, and restocked them. They're in a little box right by the front door. Or you can ask the staff at the front planning desk for some, and they've got them as well. It's online as well. Good point. It's at www.sbcreeks.org.
And I actually have a related question following up on Mr. Wilson's. If there are any members of the business community, especially in automotive or restaurant or car wash or a related field, who would like to get more information about participating or finding out about the Business Assistance Program, is there an email or a special phone number that they could call to get some information about this? And what would that be?
Absolutely. Since I've already mentioned the 2688 line, that's something that's just an easy number to remember, even though it's called our enforcement line. It'll get you to Jim, and he knows where to direct the call. So I'll reiterate the 897-2688. And I'm somebody who implements that program, so Autumn Malanka, and I can be reached at that line as well.
Oh, thank you so much. Mr. Weber, do you have any questions or suggestions?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the excellent presentation, Ms. Malanka. I just have one question. Can we return to the stormwater ordinance? I'm curious if you could just elaborate on that. We actually don't need to go back to the
I'm not
slide.
on the thing. Let's just talk about it.
Yeah,
Sure.
I just am curious what that might look like. An illicit discharge is pretty easy to wrap your head around, but I'm having a hard time understanding what stormwater ordinance would
What a
include.
stormwater ordinance is. Well, I'll start with a general explanation and maybe let Cameron take it over. The stormwater ordinance, the city has a municipal code. It's got a lot of different ordinances in it that address different things. And right now, we have a water pollution prohibited section in the code. It's section 16.15. And that's what we use right now to enforce the fact that we can't pollute our surface waters. But a stormwater ordinance was something that would more specifically address the requirements and goals in the stormwater management program. And it's the way it's going to morph and look and the language that it's going to use is to be determined. It's something that will be a citywide effort. It'll be reviewed by the public. The process will be quite intensive, but the idea is to enforce the fact that we now have these regulations from the state board that says that we have to protect stormwater quality by doing this, this, and this. And we want to actually codify that. So that's the general idea. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So would the community at large then be subject to the ordinance, or would it be the city?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. That's all I have. Thanks.
Yes.
Mr. Sluger, any questions or comments? Mr. Jordan.
Still a microphone, any microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great presentation, as always. This, of course, gives me an opportunity twice a year, as you know, to get back up on my post-construction development soapbox.
Go for it.
And so, and back to Mr. Weber's kind of talk, too. We're still under the situation where post-development requirement is that I only need to meet runoff levels. I need to be no worse than what was there pre-development. Is that still correct?
Right, the treatment, okay. Correct in saying that the runoff levels cannot be increased.
And
they
you're
have
talking
to
volume,
be volume,
right,
and
right.
we're talking volume and rate.
Okay.
So those things have to stay status quo or be
below.
decreased.
Right.
But the in addition requirement that projects are now required to comply with is the fact that they have to capture and treat a 1-inch storm from the hard surfaces on their site. And so that means calculating how much rainwater is going to flow off of their roofs, their sidewalks, their parking or lot or driveway, and figure out what design, stormwater design, will accommodate that volume. It can be pretty simple designs. And ideally infiltrate that volume into the ground for natural treatment. But if there are tight soils or high groundwater or all these other conflicts that are possible within the city, there's also the option of doing flow-through treatment, which means put it through a treatment media and then have an underdrain, and the water goes horizontally out to the storm drain after it's been treated.
Okay.
So,
but the situation could exist, of course, either way. That could either be that requirement could still lead to status quo and improvement, or an improvement. It could have been status quo, even by meeting that runoff requirement, right?
I think that it's always going to be an improvement.
A little
because
better?
At this point, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
At this point, until now,
I mean, if you already were meeting that with your existing development, and you redeveloped,
you have to meet it again.
but that'd be status quo. You could still have water running off if
Right.
it was in excess of what the requirement was before your development.
Right. It'll
So,
be
right?
status quo
Okay.
as far as what the
So back on the
amount of water.
soapbox, which you always get me on twice a year, is I just encourage us to keep moving towards changing that, and that development is a unique opportunity to begin to address that issue. That not only is it the ingredients in the water, as we all know, it's the excessive rate and volume that continues to come down our watersheds just from surfaces
Right.
that also degrades the watersheds. And I just encourage us to keep pushing and pushing on that so that we begin to incrementally make that, instead of being status quo, that we see a 10% reduction or a 20% reduction
Right.
with development, because that presents such a unique opportunity.
I agree. It's a good point.
And I would apologize I wasn't here for the first part of the presentation, but I continually see referenced now and then at particularly ABR and PC are that big guideline book, the big guideline manual.
Our guidance
which
manual.
then,
Yeah.
I get into the old Pirates of the Caribbean thing, whether it's a code or a guideline and what that is. But I see guys, Bruce Bartlett in particular, I see him frequently picking items out of that and using
Okay.
it. So I'm happy to see that, and again encourage us to keep pushing forward on making that more into a code rather than a guideline. Okay, thanks.
Agreed.
And any last questions or suggestions for Ms. Malenka on the Stormwater Management Program? Well, thank you very much for coming and sharing all that information with us.
Thank you.
Uh,
That's good.
That would bring us to item 8B, which would be a report from the Creeks Division Manager, Mr. Benson, on Jesuita fire impacts and response plan. As most people know, there was a tremendous fire in the upper watersheds in May, and it's had a lot of residual impacts. And we'd asked Mr. Benson at that time to gather some information at an opportune moment to share with the larger community, and I think that moment is now. So, Mr. Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If it's okay with you, I'm gonna stay right here and do the presentation from here. Actually, as you all know, we've had in the past year not just one major wildfire in the hills above Santa Barbara, but three. And it started with the Gap Fire, and last November we had the T Fire, and then most recently the Hesacita Fire. And then, of course, prior to that, in the backcountry, the Zaka Fire. So really four major wildfires in this area in the past year. And as you mentioned, the chair and some of the committee members had asked me to come to the committee, talk about what the impacts of those fires might be to Santa Barbara creeks and to water quality. So I'm here to do that this evening. And wanted to start with a little bit of background information. The fire began on May 5th this year. Started somewhere along the Hesacita Trail, which is how it got the name the Hesacita Fire. That particular fire burned over 8,700 acres. All of the major Santa Barbara watersheds have been severely burned when you include the T Fire and the Sycamore Creek watershed. Wanted to put this map up to show an illustration of the major Santa Barbara watersheds and the Hesacita fire area. As I just mentioned, the T Fire, first of all, I should point out, as part of your packet materials, we had a copy of this map, and I made it a little larger so that I thought that would be easier for you all to see. I'm losing my arrow here. Oh, there we go. This one shows up better, I think, on TV. So on this map, the watersheds are in different colors, makes it a little bit easier to figure out where they are, the size, and where the water's going. This is the Sycamore Creek watershed here. The T fire area basically covers right along this area. There was a little tiny piece of the Sycamore watershed up at the top there that did not burn in the T Fire, and then it did burn in the Hesacita Fire. Moving to the west, over here we have Rattlesnake Creek, which ultimately joins Mission Creek. This is the Mission Creek watershed here and comes down through the city of Santa Barbara. Over here you have San Roque Creek, and then this is the Barger Canyon watershed. Both of those join into Arroyo Burro, come out into the ocean at Arroyo Burro Beach. And we'll come back to this map in a little bit because it has some of the mitigation measures that various agencies are going to be working on to try to prevent some of the impacts that are anticipated from the fire. So as you can see, this black outline here, though, is the boundary of the Hesacita Fire. Went much further out past some of the Santa Barbara watersheds into some of the Goleta watersheds, but major burn area in the upper watersheds of the city of Santa Barbara. Here's a table to break it down in terms of statistics of the areas burned. First of all, I want to just note that these percentages of the watershed on the right-hand column here are all percentages of the watershed above Highway 192. So, as I mentioned, Barger Canyon is the upper part of the Arroyo Burro watershed, as is San Roque Creek. those two watersheds clearly severely burned, 84% of Barger Canyon and 75% of the San Roque Creek watershed. Mission and Rattlesnake Creeks also severely burned. Almost 70% of each of those watersheds above Highway 192 are severely burned. And then in the combination of the T Fire, Hesacita Fire, Sycamore Creek watershed is almost gone. It's 93% severely burned. Oops. Sorry about that. When the rains come this winter, we have the potential for some very serious impacts to water quality, flooding, and debris flows downstream of the burn area. This photo here is a photo from the winter of '95, when we had very high rain levels. This is the what's known as the Caltrans channel, large concrete trapezoidal flood control channel, and you can see it's actually overtopping the banks in some sections of this channel because of the high volume of water coming down. The committee received a presentation on the water quality impacts of the fire last month, and so I don't want to go into those details. I just wanted to bring these points up just sort of as a reminder of what we heard last time, if anyone has any questions about the potential runoff concerns with sediment, metals, pHs, alkalinity, and fire retardants. I'd be happy to answer them, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on those right now. We did not talk about flooding last month, and I wanted to start out by talking about the United States Forest Service, which after a major wildfire that affects a large area of the National Forest, puts together what's known as a BAER team, and BAER is B-A-E-R, and it's Burn Area Emergency Response Team, and they come into the area, they inspect the area, they evaluate it, they assess it, and then they prepare a report where they look at the severity of the burn. The team is made up of hydrologists, geologists, biologists, and other scientists who come together and put together a multidisciplinary report. What they found from the Hesacita fire was moderate to high burn severity in almost the entire fire area. The loss of vegetation was serious. The fire completely burned off virtually all of the vegetative cover. They found that over 2,550 acres of the burn area were rendered hydrophobic because the fire, the intensity of the heat from the fire was such that it actually altered the soil structure, and their estimate was that there would be a 34% reduction in infiltration in the entire burn area. The volume of water coming off of the burn area is estimated to be 2 3/4 times the normal volume of water. Part of that is the hydrophobic soils. Part of it is the loss of the vegetative cover. You lose all that surface area from all of the plant material, and the water hits the soils, and it doesn't absorb. It just comes right down the hillside. So as a result, the volume of water that's trying to come down the creek channels is going to be significantly higher than it normally would be. All of those things in combination will cause threats to life, safety, health, and property, and that includes public property as well as private property. So we're looking at residences, businesses, but also roads and bridges that could be directly and indirectly impacted by the potential flooding. And up here you see the severity of the burn area. This is a home up in the hills. The vegetative cover is completely gone. This is a photo from the train station, Lower Mission Creek, and I think this photo was from 1995. Obviously not a burn condition, and we still had that kind of flooding. So when you multiply this 2.75 times normal number was their estimate for Mission Creek. So you can imagine we have the potential for some very, very serious flooding. Another potential impact from the fire is the debris flows, and the Bear report noted that the slopes in the Santa Ynez Mountains are extremely steep. 31% of the burn area has slopes that are 60% or greater. The Bear team estimated an 80% or greater probability of a debris flow in all of the major Santa Barbara watersheds in a 2-year storm event. Not a huge storm, and they're estimating 80% probability of getting some of that soil moving. This picture's a little bit dark, but what you've got is a very steep slope here, loose soil and shale. And if the rain comes down with any kind of intensity, this is going to mobilize and start coming down the hillside. Very, very high sediment outputs coming out of all of the watersheds. The Bear report estimates 100,000 cubic yards of sediment from the San Roque watershed in a 2-year storm event, and estimates 100,000 cubic yards of sediment coming from both the Mission Canyon and Rattlesnake Canyon watersheds in a 5-year storm event. Overall, throughout the Santa Barbara watersheds, they estimate that the sediment yields will be 17 to 23 times the normal pre-fire conditions. And once again, you have serious threats from the debris flows to life, safety, health, and property. I just wanted to note that the density of a debris flow compared to clear flowing water is severe. It's much more dense. The force is orders of magnitude greater, and so the potential for destruction to property is magnified when you actually have a debris flow as compared to just clear water coming down the creek. I want to talk a little bit about the response plan. We've been participating in a multi-agency response that includes the U.S. Forest Service, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, County Flood Control District, the City of Santa Barbara, Caltrans, the National Weather Service, the Army Corps of Engineers, the California Department of Water Resources, and state and local emergency management agencies. We began meeting and planning a response plan for the burn area, and particularly downstream of the burn area, immediately after the fire was contained. The County Flood Control District has been taking the lead on that effort. I just wanted to say that the Creeks, for the city, the Public Works Department is taking the lead on that effort. The Creeks Division has been involved, largely. Well, I should say we're fortunate to live in a community where the Flood Control District and the Public Works Departments of both the city and county are very focused on protecting public health and safety, but they're interested in doing that in a way that doesn't disrupt the creek systems in any kind of permanent way. So we've been able to advise and provide input into some of the strategies and mitigation measures that are going to be going forward to try to provide protection for the community. We've developed a number of mitigation measures to try to address some of those potential threats from the fire, and that includes debris basins to catch some of the sediment as it's coming down from the steep part of the mountains before it gets down into the urban areas. Debris racks, which are designed to catch floating debris like tree trunks and other kind of vegetation on the surface of the water. The debris basins, I should note, are primarily for sediment and rock material. Clearing and brushing efforts in the creek, and that's removing vegetation from the creek bed. Much of that was planned as part of the annual flood control maintenance. They are doing some emergency work up in the upper portions of the watershed, particularly in Rattlesnake, Mission, and San Roque creeks. Hydromulching is a possibility. I'm not sure that's been decided or whether that's going forward for sure or not. I think the Forest Service has recommended some hydromulching, but it's only on a portion of the Maria Ignacio watershed. There will be sandbag stations set up. There will be provisions made for winter operations, and that's, when we have storms coming, we have to have equipment out in the field and be able to unclog bridges and clean out debris racks and debris basins when we get breaks in the storm, so that they're set up for the next storm. And then lastly, but very importantly, public outreach and education. And the city and county will be working together in all of the fire areas to make sure the public's notified, not just the people living right next to the creeks, but throughout the communities, because of the threat of potential flooding and debris flows. There's a little bit more detail in your map, and I notice some of you are looking at your map, and that kind of outlines some of the locations where some of those mitigation measures will be put into place. Okay, and then I wanted to conclude with a photo of an oak tree that's up in Parma Park that was severely burned in the tea fire last November, and this photo I think was taken in June, and you can see that it is recovering slowly, but the leaves up there mean that the roots are still in the ground. They're holding the soil steady, and that tree is going to recover. I wanted to point out that in the bear report, the bear team estimated that the vegetated cover would be back, not to where it was before, but to full coverage in approximately 3 to 5 years, and that's consistent with estimates that I've read in other studies and actual studies of revegetation. So with that, I'll conclude, and I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Thank you for a great report, Cameron. Let me start on this side first and see if Mr. Jordan has any questions or suggestions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple quick questions. You mentioned some numbers on sediment, amounts of sediment, and the type of storm, a measurement of a storm. The guys that do that kind of work, the engineer types, can they follow that all the way down through a watershed and project with such a type of storm, such a strength of storm, how much sediment will move, how far, where it gets pinched, where it causes a problem and causes a backup, or does it go all the way out to the ocean? Does it stop at the berm at the beach and start backing up into the lagoon there, or does all that go into that plane? Is that possible?
There are modeling programs to model just those kinds of things. The reality is that we know where the pinch points are. Looking at all of the creeks in Santa Barbara, they're where the bridges are. Those are the smallest sections of creek, and what's really difficult to estimate is the random nature of things moving through the creek. You will see, and it's not unusual in any kind of rain year, but it will be more common this year. You will see large trees moving down the creek channel in a big storm, and if the tree is facing parallel to the banks of the creek, it can make it all the way down to the ocean. No problem. If it hits a rock and flips up at the front end or the upstream end of a bridge, it'll catch other debris, and next thing you know, you've got a plug there, and then water and debris is coming out of that area. So it's difficult to predict that kind of random activity. It's possible that we could see very, very large, several ton rocks moving down the creek channels because of the force of the debris. I'm glad you brought up this issue. I did mention something about a 2-year storm and a 5-year storm, and I went back to check the records because I assumed somebody would ask that question. And what the Bear team did was they were looking at the numbers at the rain gauges up at San Marcos Pass, which up on the top of the pass you're going to get higher levels of rain than you do down in the city, but that rain's all going to flow down the creek channels. So when I say a 5-year storm, that means the frequency based on the historical data going back to, in this case, looks like 1965. what they're looking at is the frequency of this size storm coming through is approximately every 5 years, and they looked at a 6-hour period of time. That 5-year storm would drop just 4 2/3 inches, 4.66 inches at the top of San Marcos Pass. Just as a comparison, that same storm down in the city of Santa Barbara would be 2.62 inches. So you get a lot more rain up in the mountains, and all that's coming down. A 2-year storm event up on San Marcos Pass is 3 1/4 inches in 6 hours, or a little over 5 inches in a 24-hour period. So
it's an art, not a science, right?
Well, they're using the data, like I said, from 1965, and they're taking those averages and putting that together.
Okay. My other question, I know somewhere tucked into the agenda yesterday was the State Street and Cabrillo Bridge project. I know it's moving forward. I don't know if I haven't watched it yet to see what the forward means, but is that project at all then, and the improvements that we were going to see there, at risk because of the uncertainty of what's coming down the watershed this year or next year?
That's a question I would leave to the city engineer who is designing that project. I know the capacity of the new bridge is higher than the capacity of the existing bridge. So and I think the purpose of the bridge replacement down on Cabrillo is that bridge is structurally unsound, and so if you put in a structurally sound bridge with greater capacity, you probably have a better chance of having your bridge at the end of the storm. But you could have you could have a significant amount of debris coming in.
I think I was more concerned with, however, whatever the structural capacity is now, my assumption is the structural capacity is going to be less during construction, not post-construction. And if the concern over additional volume and debris coming downstream, if there is a storm, gives that group concern over starting construction because of that reason.
Like I said, for the city of Santa Barbara, the Public Works Department is taking the lead for the potential flood or debris flow preparation, and they're also the lead on the bridge project. So they're keenly aware of those issues. And I did not see the hearing yesterday, so I don't know if they gave a start date. At one time, the start date for that project was October of this year. I'm not sure if that's still what their timeline looks like. Good question.
Roger, any questions or comments?
The logical follow-on question to Mike's first question is, I understand we're in an El Nino period in the Pacific. Has any long-range forecasting for next winter done, and what is the likelihood of these 2- and 5-year events coming to pass? Has any long-range forecasting been done yet?
To be specific on the 2- and 5-year events, I don't think they've gotten that specific yet. However, the most recent information I've read from the National Weather Service is that they are anticipating a moderate El Nino year, and the language that they characterize as a moderate El Nino year with is average to slightly above average rainfall. So, I know people tend to think El Nino means you're going to have these deluges. A moderate El Nino just is in their words, is an average to slightly above average rain year. What will make a difference here is the intensity of that rainfall and the distribution of the storms. And the National Weather Service is kind of reserving judgment on that forecast until sometime this fall, probably in September. They'll have a more detailed forecast for that kind of thing.
Just as a comment, I find the 17 to 23 times numbers to be alarming. Very alarming.
Yeah, Mr. Weber, questions or comments? Mr. Bullock? Mr. Wilson?
Thank you, Chair. just a very brief comment. Alarming as those numbers all sound, just one little teeny silver lining. Try to be a little bit more of an optimist and positive here. The good news about the Hestacita fire being in May as opposed to being in October or November is there's 6, 7, 8 months of regeneration of vegetation that will help soften some of these potentially alarming effects. That's it.
Ms. Lomas?
Thank you. I don't have any questions at this time.
Thank you. I actually, much to Mr. Benson's surprise, I actually do. And they're on 3 related tracks. First, for residents in the community, is there some number with the city building department or the combined fire or bear task force where residents well before the fall-winter rainy season can call up to make sure that they have adequate flood insurance coverage? And also, will the city and county flood control, in the event of a heavy winter storm, be pre-publicizing flood evacuation routes or plans so that people don't have to wait until the kind of overtopping event you showed from 15 years ago before they decide whether to stay at home or try to move to higher ground?
The answer to the second question is yes. There will be a significant outreach effort to inform the community about the potential threats and preparation and evacuation routes. I was just looking to see if I had the website. What might be the best website to look at for information about things like flood insurance and flood preparation at this time is on the Santa Barbara County website, and you go to the Public Works Department, and that's where you find the County Flood Control District, and they've got brochures, they've got information that pertains to all of those issues, and that's a good place to start.
My second question is, you listed a very impressive coalition task force for the Bear Report, and I assume implicit in that, although you didn't state it directly, were the UCSB resources for the Marine Science Institute, the Bren School, and the School of Geography, because I hope we're working closely with them, because the possibility of setting up some experiments and some research projects on sediment, erosion, channel deposition, effects on ESHA, on the gyre, and the fisheries, it could be a once-in-a-generation opportunity. So I was wondering whether Dr. Milak and Dr. Gaines and their associates and Kevin Lafferty from USGS have been pulled into some of the meetings. So if they want to set something up to help you measure or evaluate, they can.
I know that we've been in contact with several of the people you mentioned and others who have contacted the city about access to certain areas for research programs, and we are coordinating our research with them, so we're not duplicating efforts, but we actually can complement each other's research efforts and share the data that we get. So the agencies that I mentioned are focused on public safety and flood prevention efforts primarily, but we have been in contact with people from the university and from the Bren School regarding all the issues you mentioned.
Yeah. Okay. And the question we get out on the street, for which the answer is no, is whether anyone has been charged with either the T or Jesuita fire. But my question for you and for your colleagues is, you gave a very sobering assessment of the effects on the hillside soil in the watersheds of the 2 fires. You didn't really touch on your own projections or the advice you've gotten from the task force and other groups on short, intermediate, and long-term effect on the ESHAs and the biological ecosystems themselves. I know some of them need a fire regimen periodically to regenerate or remain healthy. Others, if the fire is too big and comes too fast, may have some long-term adverse impacts. Are you or staff going to be able to give a subsequent assessment of that, or do you need more time?
Well, clearly in the burn area, you've got moderate to severe burn all the way down into the soil. We're already seeing regrowth. The early regrowth whose grass is coming back. There's not a lot of habitat left up there. It's going to take some time. Like I said, all of the studies that I've looked at concur with the Bear Report estimate that 3 to 5 years before you have vegetative cover back up on the slopes. That's going to provide your habitat. In terms of the riparian corridors, I have one slide. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it here. You can't really see. This was up from Rattlesnake Creek, and you can see that everything's burned everywhere. I mean, this is just some shale that's very loose up here. Everything's burned except this little green ribbon running down Rattlesnake Creek, and there is good riparian habitat left. That's all that's left. And what happens to that habitat is going to be dependent on what the intensity is of the storms that we have coming through. If we get a lot of debris mobilizing from up high and it goes washing through there, we're going to lose a lot of trees. So the answer is the habitat that we have left in the city is primarily only the riparian habitat in the lower reaches of these watersheds, and it just depends what we get this winter on how that fares for the future.
Yeah, I was going to wonder if I could pick Ms. Lomas's brain about the potential effects of the displacement of the wildlife. The coyotes and the skunks and the burrowing owls and the snakes and the lizards, and obviously some of them perished because they weren't able to get out in time. But others of them, as the season goes on, are going to be pushed outside the areas that we usually consider for them. So did you have any thoughts, or has your team done any research in that area?
I was just going to bring that up. The biggest problem is educating the homeowners that are living in the area closest to the fire on how to deal with wildlife. You're going to have a lot of complaints, and we're going to have a lot of complaints. There's going to be mountain lion calls. There already have been. Raccoon problems, possum problems. And so it'd be good to get out. Fish and Game has brochures on their website on dealing with nuisance wildlife. Those can be somehow maybe added to some of your information. They're going to be seeking water. The predators will come down looking for cats and dogs. So there's going to have to be some educational component on leaving your pets in at night, not leaving your dog food out. Just the basics, covering your garbage cans. After the Zaka fire, there were a lot of problems with people shooting deer coming on their property because I don't know why they didn't want deer grazing on their grasses. But so I think it's going to be a huge issue, especially with the predators, the mountain lions. We have a lot of mountain lions. Our population is at carrying capacity, and same with the bears. So we're going to see a lot more.
And the same question we had for Ms. Malenka earlier, if people are interested in getting more information on this before they have to actually deal with it, is there a particular number or an email address or a website location where people could go to try to self-educate before the season goes much further?
Yes, the Fish and Game website is www.dfg.ca.gov, and there's a section, or you can click on nuisance wildlife. Also, if people are having problems with wildlife, of course, there's the Wild Care Network in Santa Barbara and Julia DeCiano in the San Ynez Valley that will take injured wildlife almost of all kinds. She's permitted to take bobcats and deer, a lot of the animals that other rehabbers can't take. So she can be reached through the Sheriff's Department. I don't have her number on hand.
Yeah. Thank you. Finally, I'd like to thank Mr. Benson for pulling together a huge amount of data and obviously a lot of research with a team task force approach coming right on the heels of a desperate emergency. And to have this much information just 10 weeks after the fact, I think is very impressive. So I want to thank you for pulling it together, and I appreciate now in retrospect why you asked us to wait a little while because you'd have more to report. So that's really clear. I think that completes item number 8. Before we move forward, I'd like to go backward. We continued item number 7 so that we could determine whether Mr. Jordan had anything to report from the stakeholders meeting on the Upper Arroyo Burrow Creek Improvement Project. Michael?
And thank you, Mr. Chair. I do. I attended the first stakeholder meeting sometime last week at the city's property there on the golf course. And if you haven't been there yet, you're going to get to be there next month, I hope, and would encourage you all to. But there's large machinery moving around and dirt moving. And as with any project, I think that happens where there's a project like this going on, there's users involved, there's construction people, there's disgruntled users walking around, there's stressed out construction workers, there's environmental people all excited. So I would encourage us to stay on talking points with that and remember what a large beneficial project that's going to be and chat that up any opportunity we have. There's a lot of activity going on there. There's a lot of benefits that are going to be seen as that. There's a lot of money being spent, but it still represents a huge bang for the buck when it's all done. And I never really asked this, but would it not be true that other than the airport project, isn't this going to be the largest city restoration project to date by most measurements? That'd be true, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. I don't know what all the city projects have ever been done, but it's significant. Right. It's probably 20% larger than the project that we did over at the Arroyo Burrow.
Right.
Estuary.
And
same
and one point I'll keep hammering on, I think most of you know I live a long throw from Arroyo Burrow, is that I anticipate when that project is done on the city property at the Muni Golf Course, that project will rival the look of Arroyo Burrow. Be a little more difficult to get to unless you want to pay your money in a golf cart, but there will be some great benefits there. It will visually be wonderful. It will functionally serve a great purpose. And again, we have some mixed history on site visits, so I'd encourage you all to be available for a site visit next month. And any chance you get to chat about that project, if you hear it in the line at the grocery store, to have some good talking points ready to go. Thanks. And we meet every couple weeks, so if we meet again next month, should have a couple more reports on where we are and how it's going.
Is that a Mulligan's Cafe?
We were, yes.
Okay, so if people are interested, that would be the place to be.
Friday at Thursday, so it's a week from tomorrow at 11:30 or 12. That's pretty definite, isn't it? I'm doing okay, but Liz will send out a little email to me to remind me, and I'll forward that along.
Thank you for a good report, Michael. It's worth waiting for. As we move from 8B to 8C towards adjournment, I was wondering, I was remiss earlier, I was wondering whether Liz could tell the committee very briefly if there's anything on Saturday, September 19th, that people interested in creeks or coastal cleanup might want to be looking forward to, either to learn about or to participate in.
Thank you, Chair Moldaver. Saturday, September 19th is the 25th Annual Coastal Cleanup Day, and it is also going to be the kickoff for our 10th Annual Creek Week. And so today we had our first organizational meeting, and several, I think maybe 15 people were there to participate, and from many different organizations, including Chumash, the City of Carpinteria, the City of Goleta, County of Santa Barbara, UC Davis Extension, Agua Pura. So many people getting involved and planning events. So if people would like to get involved, they can go to www.sbcreekweek.com, and there is a link there if you want to get involved on Coastal Cleanup Day, or contact us to schedule an event during the week.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to...
Mr. Chair, and you made me look, so I looked on my...
Okay, Michael?
It's the 23rd, Thursday the 23rd, 11 o'clock at Mulligan's.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'd also like to indicate that that day is also the United Way Day of Caring. And so if there are people... This is going to be, number one, a very family-friendly event, not just in the city, but all throughout the South Coast. So if families want to learn more about creeks and their habitat and their wildlife ecosystems, this would be a great day for families and PTAs to point toward. And if anyone is interested in volunteering and helping to strengthen or restore any of these watersheds or creeks or beaches, this would also be a great day to get outdoors and get involved. So I'm going to have to ask someone with the committee. That was what I was looking for. Is there a second? Second. All right, it's been seconded by Mr. Bullock. It's been moved and seconded. So with final welcomes to Mr. Bullock and Ms. Lomas to the committee, all those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? We are adjourned at 6:57 p.m. Thank you.